Welcome, weary traveler, to a journey not just across ancient lands, but through the tranquil depths of time itself. Find a comfortable space. Let the day's worries drift like dust motes in a sunbeam, and allow your mind to unfurl as we embark upon a grand, unhurried exploration. Tonight, we will whisper tales of distant horizons, of shimmering silks and fragrant spices, of the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of empires connected by threads of trade and human endeavor. Let the gentle cadence of our story guide you into a state of deep relaxation, a peaceful slumber woven from the rich tapestry of history. Our journey begins not with a clamor of trumpets or the roar of battle, but with the subtle rustle of leaves in an ancient garden, the distant hum of a city awakening, thousands of miles from the familiar shores of the Mediterranean. We cast our minds back over 2 millennia, to a time when the known world was a patchwork of nascent empires and sprawling wilderness, connected less by maps and more by the indomitable spirit of those who dared to venture beyond the horizon. Our destination for these initial lingering moments is the eastern heart of this grand network. The magnificent city of Chang'an, the eternal capital of the mighty Han dynasty. Imagine, if you will, standing atop one of Chang'an's colossal city walls, just as the first tentative fingers of dawn begin to brush across the eastern sky. The air is cool, still carrying the lingering chill of the night, but there's a promise of warmth in the strengthening light. Below, the city is a vast, slumbering giant, its grid-like streets still mostly quiet. The scent of damp earth mingles with the faint, sweet perfume of blossoming fruit trees from the imperial gardens, carried on the gentlest breeze. It's a scent that speaks of fertility, of life, and of the structured beauty of an organized civilization. The sheer scale of the city is breathtaking, its walls stretching far, far into the blurred horizon, testament to the power and ambition of the Han emperors who presided over this sprawling realm. As the sun climbs higher, its light shifts from a pale gold to a more vibrant, buttery yellow, beginning to warm the cold stone and packed earth of the city. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Chang'an begins to awaken, the distant muffled clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the lowing of oxen being led to the fields beyond the gates, the rhythmic sweep of a broom against cobbled stones. These are the first subtle notes in the symphony of a new day. The air takes on a different quality, no longer solely damp earth and blossoms, but now carrying faint whispers of wood smoke from kitchen fires being stoked, preparing the morning meal. Soon, the aroma of steamed grains, perhaps a hint of ginger or garlic, will begin to waft through the narrower alleys. We descend from the wall, our steps quiet, and enter the maze of Chang'an's inner arteries. The main avenues are wide, meticulously planned, and lined with orderly rows of modest wooden and earthen homes, interspersed with more ornate structures belonging to officials and merchants. The early morning light filters through the gaps between buildings, creating long, stretching shadows that play across the textured surfaces of the walls. Here, in the quiet residential areas, the sounds are intimate. A child's soft cry quickly soothed, the creak of a wooden cart being readied, the murmured voices of a family sharing their morning tea. These are the sounds of everyday life, repeating themselves with gentle consistency across the centuries. The fabric of daily life in Chang'an, and indeed across the Han Empire, was one of order and routine, deeply intertwined with the rhythm of the seasons and the philosophies that guided the imperial court. Confucian ideals of harmony, respect, and filial piety permeated society from the highest official to the humblest farmer. This was a society that valued tradition, scholarship, and the steady pursuit of balance. The very layout of the city, with its precise grid and monumental gates, reflected this desire for order, a human attempt to mirror the cosmic harmony believed to govern the universe. The air itself felt structured, imbued with a sense of purpose and continuity. As we drift further into the heart of the city, the sounds slowly begin to swell. The clatter of hooves on cobbled streets, the calls of street vendors beginning their day's trade, the deeper murmur of conversations growing in number and volume. The main markets, still a little while away from their peak bustle, are nevertheless showing signs of impending activity. Merchants are unfurling their awnings, arranging their wares, their movements unhurried, practiced, almost ritualistic. The faint metallic tang of bronze and Iron from the artisan workshops begins to mix with the earthy, scent of drying herbs and the sweet perfume of exotic fruits. Consider the clothing of the people who now begin to fill these streets. For the common folk, it would be simple tunics and trousers, primarily made of hemp or rougher silks dyed in muted natural colors, browns, creams, soft indigos derived from plants. The texture would be coarse, yet durable, rustling softly with each movement. For those of higher status, the silks would be finer, more richly embroidered, perhaps in vibrant reds, deep greens, or imperial yellows, flowing gracefully with every step. The sensation of these fabrics against the skin, the way they draped and moved, was an integral part of their daily experience, a silent indicator of their place within the structured society. The air itself seems to carry a different weight, depending on where you stand in Chang'an. Near the imperial palace, a palpable sense of gravity, of hushed reverence hangs heavy. Here the gardens are meticulously manicured, the architecture grand and imposing, designed to inspire awe and reinforce the emperor's divine mandate. The scent of rare incense from ancestral temples might occasionally drift on the breeze, a smoky, spiritual aroma that speaks of ancient rituals and profound beliefs. Further out, in the bustling commercial districts, the air is thick with the scent of human activity, Irish stew of commerce, cuisine, and countless lives intersecting. Beyond the colossal walls of Chang'an, the landscape unfurls into a vast tapestry of fertile plains, fed by the Wei River, an artery of life for this ancient civilization. Here, the dominant sound is the gentle rustle of ripening grain in the fields, a whisper that speaks of the bounty of the earth and the ceaseless labor of farmers. The light here is broader, less broken by buildings, casting long, peaceful shadows over the cultivated land. There is cleaner, fresher, carrying the scent of rich soil and distant wildflowers, a marked contrast to the more concentrated aromas of the city. The Han Empire was not merely Chang'an, but a vast and interconnected network of cities, towns, and villages, all linked by a comprehensive system of roads and canals. Even far from the capital, the rhythm of life was ordered, disciplined, and focused on self-sufficiency, yet always aware of the distant central authority. Messengers on horseback would gallop along these well-maintained routes, carrying decrees, news, and sometimes the first whispers of goods from unimaginable foreign lands. These were the nascent veins of the grand artery that would one day become the Silk Road, though in these early days, its potential was still largely unrevealed. Let us dwell for a moment on the quality of light itself in this ancient world. Unpolluted by industrial haze or electric glow, the sun, whether rising or setting, bathed everything in a purity of color that modern eyes rarely witness. Golden hour truly was golden, painting the city walls and distant hills in hues of liquid amber and rose. Midday sun, while bright, possessed a distinct clarity, emphasizing textures and forms with a sharp precision. And twilight, a long, gradual descent into purple and deep blue, brought with it a profound sense of peace, a slowing down of all activity as lanterns were lit and families gathered within their homes. The light was a constant, gentle painter of the world. The wind, too, played its part in shaping the sensory experience of Han China. In Chang'an, it might carry the murmur of the markets, the scent of cooking, or the faint, sweet perfume of flowers. On the plains, it would rustle through the crops, carrying the earthy smell of the fields. As one moved west, towards the encroaching deserts, the wind would grow drier, carrying fine dust, a whisper of the vast, untamed wilderness that lay beyond the familiar borders of the empire. It was a constant companion, an unseen force shaping sounds, distributing scents, and influencing the very feel of the air against one's skin. The soundscape of this era was dominated by natural elements and the gentle hum of human activity, utterly devoid of the mechanical cacophony of our modern world. Birdsong at dawn, the buzzing of insects in summer, the distant cry of a wild animal, therush of a river, the gentle drip of water in a serene garden pond. These were the dominant auditory textures. Human sounds were softer too. Footsteps on dirt paths or wooden floors, the rhythmic chop of a kitchen knife, the quiet creak of a hand loom, the low chatter of voices in conversation, perhaps the melancholic strumming of a gukin in a scholar's courtyard. All these elements combined to create a profound sense of natural peace. Even the objects of daily life contributed to this sensory richness. The smooth, cool feel of a polished jade ornament against the skin, the earthy texture of unglazed pottery, the gentle rustle of a bamboo scroll unfurling, the distinctive taste of fermented grains, the faint, metallic scent of bronze ritual vessels, the comforting warmth of a charcoal brazier on a cool evening. Every interaction with the material world was tactile, visceral, and unmediated by artificiality. It was a world experienced through the senses in a much more direct and profound way. The Han dynasty, in its golden age, cultivated an empire of immense cultural sophistication and administrative prowess. It was a period of flourishing arts, advancements in science and technology, paper, porcelain, seismographs, and sophisticated astronomical instruments were all products of this vibrant era. Yet for all its internal brilliance, the Han Empire remained largely inward-looking, viewing its own civilization as the center of the world, often referring to itself as the Middle Kingdom. The vast lands to its west, beyond the formidable mountain ranges and endless deserts, were largely unknown, a mysterious realm populated by nomadic tribes and whispered legends. This perception, however, was slowly but inevitably destined to change. The very strength and expansion of the Han Empire brought it into increasing contact with these western territories. Patrols extended further into the arid frontiers, establishing watchtowers and garrisons to protect against incursions from the Xiongnu nomads, a formidable confederation of horsemen who roamed the steppes. These initial interactions, often fraught with tension and conflict, also carried the seeds of something entirely new. The first, hesitant exchanges of goods and ideas. A captured Xiongnu artifact, perhaps a beautifully crafted bronze buckle or a finely woven wool rug, would spark curiosity, hinting at different aesthetics, different ways of life. The sheer scale of the land beyond the Han borders was intimidating. To the west lay the vast, shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert, aptly nicknamed the Sea of Death, a place where rivers disappeared and travelers could vanish without a trace. Beyond that, towering mountain ranges, like the Pamirs and the Tian Shan, scraped the sky, their peaks perpetually capped with snow, forming seemingly impenetrable barriers. It was a landscape of stark beauty and immense danger, a true wilderness that demanded respect and instilled a sense of humbling insignificance in those who dared to traverse it. The air itself here felt thinner, drier, carrying the grit of sand and the faint, cold scent of distant peaks. Yet, even in this formidable landscape, life found a way. Scattered oases, fed by underground springs or meltwater from the mountains, dotted the desert's edge like emerald jewels. These were places of miraculous respite, offering sweet water, date palms, and pockets of fertile land where small communities eked out an existence. The sound of water bubbling from a spring in such a desolate place would have been a profound comfort, a melody of survival. The air in these oases was subtly different, carrying the refreshing scent of damp earth and verdant leaves, a stark contrast to Thedri, dusty air of the open desert. It was into this vast, largely unknown western expanse that the first Han emissaries, driven by imperial decree and an insatiable curiosity, would eventually venture. Their journeys were not quick dashes, but slow, arduous expeditions, often lasting for years, fraught with peril from natural elements, treacherous terrain, and sometimes hostile encounters. Imagine the immense courage required, the quiet determination, to step beyond the familiar comforts of the Middle Kingdom and move into a world that grew increasingly alien with every passing mile. The sun beat down relentlessly, the wind whipped fine sand into their faces, and the silence of the wilderness was often broken only by the creak of their saddle and the rhythmic pad of their camels' feet. The motivations for these initial expeditions were complex. Primarily, they were strategic. To forge alliances with distant kingdoms against the perennial threat of the Xiongnu. Yet, as these emissaries pushed deeper, they encountered peoples and cultures utterly unlike their own. They saw horses of unparalleled size and strength, heard languages that were a cacophony of unfamiliar sounds, and tasted foods with spices unknown in Chang'an. Slowly, Painstakingly, the world beyond the Han borders began to take shape, less a realm of myth and more a vibrant, diverse tapestry of human existence, each strand shimmering with its own unique history and culture. It was during these encounters that the Han envoys first observed the subtle yet irresistible allure of their own most prized product: silk. Fine, shimmering, impossibly soft, woven with intricate patterns and dyed in brilliant colors previously unseen in the West. For centuries, the Chinese had guarded the secrets of sericulture with extreme jealousy, punishing severely any who dared to reveal the delicate process of raising silkworms and reeling their precious threads. Silk was more than just fabric. It was a symbol of status, of wealth, of the Middle Kingdom's unparalleled artistry. When these early envoys offered bolts of silk as gifts to the rulers of distant western lands, they did not just offer a material possession. They offered a glimpse into a world of astonishing refinement, a tactile experience that transcended language barriers. The smooth, cool feel of the silk against the skin, the way it shimmered and caught the light, the sheer artistry of its creation. These were qualities that captivated and enchanted. The desire for this miraculous fabric would become an unstoppable force, a gentle, persistent current that would begin to flow across continents, slowly carving out the path of what would become the Silk Road. And so, as the Han dynasty stood at the zenith of its power, its people cultivating their lands, debating their philosophies, and creating their exquisite arts within the protective embrace of their ancient walls, the seeds of a profound transformation were being sown. The subtle yet persistent appeal of a single, delicate thread of silk, woven by patient hands in distant Chang'an, would soon begin to draw the world closer. The rhythm of life in the Middle Kingdom, so ordered and self-contained, was on the cusp of intertwining with the vastly different rhythms of other civilizations, initiating a slow, grand exchange that would reshape continents and connect cultures across unimaginable distances. This gentle awakening, this slow unfurling of connections, is where we leave our initial exploration tonight. The wind whispers softly through the willows along the Wei River, carrying the faint, comforting scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The stars begin to prickle the inky blackness above Chang'an, each one a tiny beacon in the vastness of the ancient sky. Rest now, as the gentle currents of history continue to flow, preparing the stage for the grand narrative that awaits us. The year is approximately 138 BCE, and we turn our attention from the subtle, daily rhythms of Chang'an to a single, pivotal moment of departure, a slow, deliberate step that would unintentionally unleash the vast currents of global interaction. This is the moment of the catalyst, the quiet beginning of the colossal endeavor that would slowly, but surely weave the disparate parts of the ancient world together. The man tasked with this momentous undertaking was Zhang Qian, a low-ranking official, whose quiet determination belied the historical weight he was about to carry. His mission, dictated by the Emperor Wu, was narrowly focused and military in nature: to travel west, far beyond the established borders, and seek an alliance with the Yuezhi, a powerful nomadic tribe that had been displaced by the ever-present Xiongnu. This was a strategic move, a geopolitical effort to strike the Xiongnu from two sides. There was no grand vision of international trade or cultural exchange in the initial mandate. Only the cold calculation of imperial defense. The small expedition, consisting of Zhang Qian, his trusted guide Ganfu, and a retinue of perhaps 100 soldiers and servants, was an act of profound courage and trust, given the near-total ignorance of the terrain and the peoples that lay ahead. As they passed through the immense, heavily fortified gates of Chang'an, the sounds of the bustling city quickly began to recede, replaced by the increasingly sparse and dry sounds of the western plains. The clatter of their horses' hooves and the soft, measured padding of the camels' feet on the packed earth became the dominant, soothing rhythm of their journey. The early stages of their journey were relatively smooth, traversing the familiar, though sparsely populated, territories under nominal Han control. However, as they pressed relentlessly westward, the air grew noticeably thinner, drier, and the scenery began its dramatic transformation. The fertile, loess-rich soil of the central plains gave way to a harsher, rocky terrain. The comfortable scents of cultivated fields and wood smoke were slowly supplanted by the sharp, arid scent of sagebrush, dust, and the earthy, musky smell of their horses and camels. It was inevitable, given the political landscape, that Zhang Qian's small group would soon cross into the contested lands controlled by the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu, magnificent horsemen and formidable warriors, commanded the steppes with an easy, nomadic mastery. Their presence was announced not by loud conflict, but by the subtle, yet undeniable, signs of their domain: a distant herd of grazing horses, the specific scent of wood smoke mingled with dried dung, or the faint, rhythmic drumming of hooves on the dry ground. They felt more than heard. Tragically, the Xiongnu eventually intercepted the Han mission. The capture was not a quick, dramatic skirmish, but likely a slow, enveloping maneuver, reflecting the Xiongnu's superior knowledge of the terrain. Zhang Qian and many of his retinue were taken captive. His journey, intended to be a brisk diplomatic mission, transformed into a decade-long period of forced stasis, an involuntary immersion into the very culture he was meant to circumvent. During these long years of captivity, Zhang Qian was forced to adapt. He learned the Xiongnu language, observed their customs, and, in a profound testament to the quiet power of human connection, he was allowed to take a Xiongnu wife and father children. The sounds of his daily life shifted entirely: the lowing of cattle, the constant, busy murmur of a nomadic camp, the cheerful shouts of children playing on the steppes, the complex, guttural sounds of the Xiongnu language replacing the familiar tones of Han Chinese. The air he breathed was thick with the scent of fermented milk, animal hides, wood smoke, and the vast, untamed freedom of the steppe wind. Yet throughout this extended, forced pause, Zhang Qian's core mission never entirely faded. The thought of the emperor's command, the sense of duty instilled by his Han culture, remained a quiet, persistent fire within him. His observations, however, extended far beyond the Xiongnu. He gathered invaluable, detailed intelligence about the world to the west, its geography, its political structure, its resources, and their numerous peoples scattered across Central Asia. He slowly assembled a mental map of the vast territories beyond the Gobi, piecing together fragments of information from other travelers and Xiongnu scouts. After an astonishing 10 years, Lin Wangxian seized an opportunity for escape. The exact circumstances are lost to history's soft shadows, but one can imagine the quiet, heart-pounding tension of that night, the near-silent preparation, the hushed farewells, then careful padding of hooves as he, his wife, his son, and Ganfu slipped away under the deep blanket of the steppe night. The air was cold, crisp, carrying the metallic scent of fear and the promise of the unknown road ahead. Their escape was not a dash, but a slow, cautious move toward freedom. Now free, Zhang Qian resumed his quest for the Yuezhi, pressing deeper into Central Asia. He traveled along the northern rim of the Taklamakan Desert, navigating the perilous string of oases that served as life rafts in the sea of sand. The sheer, overwhelming silence of the desert became a pervasive, soothing soundscape, broken only by the gritty whisper of the sand shifting in the wind and the steady, rhythmic clop of the camels. The sun beat down with an intense, unwavering heat, forcing travel mostly during the cooler, deeper shadows of dawn and dusk. The air was perpetually dry, making the taste of water, when found, profoundly sweet and revitalizing. He passed through the regions that would eventually become known as the Tarim Basin Kingdoms, a chain of surprisingly vibrant, multicultural cities and settlements nestled between the desert and the colossal mountain ranges. Here, the sensory experience shifted again. The air began to carry the mixed aromas of distant pine forests, irrigation canals, and the faint, sweet scent of burning juniper. He encountered peoples whose faces and clothing were different from any he had seen. Indo-European inhabitants speaking unfamiliar languages, wearing brightly colored patterned wool and felt, their ears often lighter than those of the Han. Zhang Qian finally located the Yuezhi, settled in the fertile lands of the Fergana Valley, a region of legendary beauty and immense strategic importance. The sight of this land, after the endless dust and rock of the journey, must have been a profound comfort. Here the air was softer, heavier with moisture, and carried the rich, earthy scent of cultivation. The dominant sound was the babbling of streams and the lowing of incredibly powerful horses, a breed known for their heavenly speed and stamina. Unfortunately for Jiang Qian's official mission, the Yuezhi were content in their new home and had no desire to return east to fight the Xiongnu. His efforts at forming a military alliance were politely, yet firmly, rebuffed. His decade of sacrifice had seemingly yielded nothing for the Han war machine, yet this was far from the truth. While the military objective failed, the unintended outcome of his journey was of world historical significance. During his year in the Fergana Valley, Chang'an made a crucial observation. Local merchants were trading not only local goods, but also bamboo staves and fine silk cloth, products unmistakably originating from Sichuan, a southwestern province of the Han Empire, thousands of miles away. He learned that these goods were traveling not directly west through the treacherous Xiongnu lands, but south through India and then north into Central Asia. This revelation was electrifying. It indicated the existence of vast, interconnected trade networks already functioning, albeit indirectly, between the Han Empire and the West. It proved that the Han's products were desired, highly valued, and were already being moved across continental distances by unseen hands and unknown intermediary traders. After a long and difficult second return journey, which involved traversing new, dangerous routes and another brief period of Xiongnu captivity, Jiang Qian finally arrived back in Chang'an in 126 BCE, 13 years after his departure. Only he and Ganfu remained of the original 100-man retinue. The Emperor Wu, who had long assumed him dead, received him with astonishment and reverence. Jiang Qian's report was a revelation. It detailed not only the failed military alliance, but, far more importantly, a comprehensive, accurate picture of the western region's Xiyu. He brought back the seeds of alfalfa and grapes, introduced the Han to the existence of formidable, heavenly horses in Fergana, and crucially, described the sophisticated civilizations that lay further west, including the existence of a mighty empire he called Daxia, Bactria, and an even greater, more distant one, which he named Dakin, the Roman Empire. The most profound impact of Jiang Qian's journey was the realization that the world was vast, interconnected, and that the distant Western kingdoms represented not just military targets, but immense sources of valuable goods and powerful political allies. Emperor Wu, captivated by the promise of the Fergana horses to bolster his cavalry, and intrigued by the sheer wealth suggested by the continued desire for Han silk, was inspired to act. This was the slow, inevitable shift, the catalyst for the Silk Road's proper formation. The Han court now viewed the West not as a barrier, but as a destination. Jiang Qian's reconnaissance proved that travel was possible, though arduous, in that the commercial and strategic rewards justified the immense effort. Following Jiang Qian's report, Emperor Wu initiated a massive, organized effort to secure and solidify the routes into Central Asia. This involved extensive military campaigns, notably pushing the Xiongnu back and securing the Hexi Corridor, an arrow, critical strip of land that formed the natural pathway between the towering mountains and the formidable deserts. This corridor, essentially a geographical funnel, was the gateway to the west. The securing of the Hexi Corridor was not a sudden victory, but a prolonged, costly, and methodical process. Soldiers were marched thousands of miles, their feet churning up the dusty earth, the metallic scent of their armor mingling with the dry, earthy smell of the plains. They established garrison towns, built permanent fortifications of rammed earth, and extended the line of watchtowers far into the west. The sound of their labor, the rhythmic thud of earth being pounded for walls, the clank of tools, the stern commands of officers, became a new, steady heartbeat in this previously silent wilderness. These new garrison towns, such as Danhuang, became crucial nodes in the emerging network. They represented the furthest reach of Han administrative and military might, acting as protective islands of order and civilization on the edge of the unknown. Life here was harsh. Cold in winter, fiercely hot in summer, constantly buffeted by the desert winds. The soldiers and settlers lived on basic rations, their simple, earthen homes providing only minimal respite. Yet they were the silent guardians of the route, ensuring the slow, steady flow of traffic could begin. With the Hexi corridor secured, the first regular state-sanctioned caravans began to move. These were massive, organized expeditions, often numbering hundreds of men and camels, bearing not only silk but lacquerware, bronze mirrors, medicinal herbs, and crucially, documentation and credentials from the imperial court. The sheer scale of these caravans was a statement of intent, a demonstration of the Han's commitment to forging direct contact with the distant West. The sound of a large caravan moving was an overwhelming, complex texture. It began with the soft, persistent plumph of hundreds of padded camel feet hitting the dry earth. This was underscored by the rhythmic, creaking complaint of their wooden saddles and heavy loads, interspersed with the low, guttural grunts and sighs of the camels themselves, punctuated by the occasional loud commands of the handlers, their voices dry and rough from the desert air, communicating in short, functional phrases. It was a slow, hypnotic soundscape of immense effort and gradual progress. These early, official journeys were the true formation of the Silk Road's eastern spine. They were driven by the insatiable Western demand for silk, now confirmed by Zhang Qian's travels, and the strategic Han desire for those legendary Fergana horses. The material goods, particularly the silk, served as the universal currency, the object of desire that smoothed diplomatic passages and secured essential local support and protection along the route. The path began to solidify into two primary routes around the vast, impassable Taklamakan Desert, the northern route and the southern route, both winding through the chain of essential oasis cities. These oases, once isolated pockets of life, now found themselves strategically positioned as mandatory stopping points, places forest, trade, water, and fresh supplies. In these oasis cities, places like Lulan, Khotan Kashgar, the mingling of cultures began in earnest. A Han traveler resting in a tea house would sit alongside a Tokharian merchant from the north, a Sogdian trader from the west, and perhaps a nomadic chieftain from the steppes. The air would be filled with a babble of entirely different languages, a harmonious jumble of sounds that were the auditory signature of the burgeoning trade route. The scents, too, were a profound mix, the clean smell of local pottery, the exotic, smoky fragrance of incense from India, the strong, familiar tang of fermented drinks, and the faint, sweet perfume of drying dates. It is important to remember that the Silk Road was never a single paved road, nor was it traveled in one go by a single merchant. It was a vast, sprawling network of segments, airlay race of goods and ideas passed from one intermediary to the next. The journey of a single bolt of Han's silk, from a loom in Chang'an to a wealthy Roman villa, involved dozens of hands, multiple languages and months, sometimes years, of slow, deliberate travel across immense distances. This slow, patient progression is the very nature of the Silk Road. In the rhythm of its movement is one of the most soothing elements of its history. Zhang Qian's accidental legacy was the establishment of the Han presence in the West, which in turn provided the essential security and structure necessary for these intermediaries to operate confidently. His personal sacrifice of a decade of his life was the slow, difficult process that catalyzed the world's greatest ancient trade network. He did not set out to create the Silk Road, but by opening the eyes of the Han Empire to the vastness and profitability of the West, he ensured its existence. The memory of his arduous travels, his perseverance across years of hardship, serves as a quiet reminder of the persistent human drive to connect, to trade and to explore. The air now carries the faint, mingled scent of the desert's night chill and the residual warmth of the day's sun on stone. The sounds of the ancient world are quieting once more, receding into the deep, enveloping peace of history. Rest, as the slow, enduring spirit of the early travelers continues its journey across the empty spaces of the map, and we prepare to follow the threads of silk further into the heart of the world. The slow, deliberate creation of the Silk Road's eastern security structure, a process begun by Zhang Qian and solidified by the Han armies. It now shifts the focus of our journey westward. The path is open, not wide and smooth. but a tenuous, winding thread across deserts and mountains, maintained by the constant grinding effort of human commerce and a relentless desire for the exotic. The next part of our narrative immerses itself fully in the culture and mechanics of this long-distance exchange, dwelling in the rhythm of the journey itself, and introducing the essential intermediary, the Sogdian merchant. The rhythm of the road. Dunhuang to Kashgar, our journey resumes at the westernmost limits of secure Han control, in a place now established as the crucial jumping-off point, Dunhuang, the blazing beacon. The town itself, a cluster of mud brick buildings fortified by high earthen walls, was perpetually coated in the fine, reddish-brown dust carried by the wind from the nearby Gobi Desert. Here, the sensory world was a blend of the familiar Han order and the wild, unpredictable nature of the West. The air smelled of drying leather, the musky scent of camels, stale cooking oil, and the ever-present aroma of dry earth and mineral dust. The soundscape was a low, constant murmur, the gentle clink of coins being counted in merchant houses, the creak of well ropes drawing precious water, the distant, repetitive commands of Han guards on patrol, and the distinctive, low, resonant bell of the caravan camel, a sound that became the auditory signature of the Silk Road itself. The merchants preparing for the traverse were a striking tapestry of humanity. Officials, cloaked in heavy, dignified robes, overseen the dispatch of state goods. Silk, lacquerware, bronze mirrors, meticulously checked and documented. But the true spirit of the road was embodied by the Central Asian traders, specifically the Sogdians. The Sogdians hailed from the fertile oasis region around Samarkand and Bukhara, an Iranian-speaking people whose genius lay not in military might or grand empires, but in their extraordinary commercial skill. They were the essential glue of the Silk Road. They did not produce the silk, nor did they consume much of the final product, but they mastered the long, fragmented journey in between. Unlike the Han state caravans, the Sogdians operated on pure profit, driven by generations of inherited knowledge and an unparalleled linguistic ability. They spoke not only their native Sogdian, an Indo-Iranian tongue, but also became proficient in the various forms of Chinese, the languages of the nomadic tribes, and the Iranian dialects further west. Their words were their true currency, their fluency turning complex. Multi-stage negotiations into a smooth, lulling exchange of understood terms. The sound of a Sogdian negotiating was often a complex, melodic mix of different languages, delivered in a low, persuasive tone, a typical Sogdian caravan. Unlike the massive, state-sponsored affairs, was often smaller, lighter, and more adaptable. Their camels were their most prized assets, creatures built for endurance, their broad, padded feet ideal for the shifting sand and hard, dry earth. Preparing the camel train was a slow, deliberate ritual that took hours. Each load had to be perfectly balanced, secured with thick ropes of braided hair and leather, ensuring that no sharp edge or uneven weight would chafe the animal over the course of the hundreds of miles ahead. The scent of hot pitch, used to seal wounds or repair harness, would hang in the air near the camel pens. The journey from Dunhuang westward quickly plunges into the terrifying reality of the Taklamakan Desert. The name itself, translated by some as, "Go in and you won't come out," was a constant, sober warning. To traverse this immense space required perfect timing, meticulous provisioning, and deep respect for the subtle signs of the environment. The caravans followed the strings of life-giving oases, effectively moving along two main routes that skirted the desert's northern and southern edges. The daily rhythm on the road was governed by the sun. The caravans would often rise before dawn, driven by the intense heat of midday. The sound of the handlers waking the animals, a series of whistles, clicks, and low guttural commands, would cut through the pre-dawn silence. The air at this hour was often bitterly cold, carrying a penetrating dampness that promised the eventual scorching heat. They would march for hours in the cool, blue-gray light of early morning, the only sound being the hypnotically rhythmic footfall and the gentle jingle of camel bells. As the sun rose higher, the light became a palpable force, a heavy yellow blanket that sucked the moisture from everything it touched. The wind, a constant companion, would shift from a cool breeze to a dry, gritty blast, carrying fine particles of sand that irritated the eyes and clogged the nostrils. The metallic taste of dust became a constant fixture in the mouths of the travelers. They would often halt their movement during the fierce midday heat, sheltering under thick cloths or sparse scrub, entering a state of enforced quiet stillness where only the heavy, shared breathing of man and beast could be heard. The oasis cities, separated by grueling weeks of travel, were moments of profound relief. Lulain, Khotan, and eventually Kashgar became the pearls strung along the Silk Road. Arriving at an oasis was a sensory overload of comfort. The first sight of the towering green date palms, stark against the yellow desert, was an emotional event. The air immediately smelled different, suddenly rich with the scent of fresh water, fertile soil, and the sweet perfume of cultivated fruits. The sound of running water, a gurgling stream, the splashing of an irrigation channel, was the most beautiful music a weary traveler could hear. These oasis cities were not merely rest stops. They were dynamic, multicultural hubs, miniature worlds where goods were exchanged, partnerships were formed, and travelers recuperated. In the bazaars of Khotan, famous for its exquisite jade andunique, strong-smelling musk, the Sogdians would divest themselves of some of their Han silk, exchanging it for local products. This system of gradual exchange, like a great river constantly being fed by smaller tributaries, allowed the silk to move westward without any single merchant having to undertake the entire, impossible distance. The food in these oasis towns was a revelation after weeks of dry rations. Flatbreads baked in earthen ovens, still hot and carrying the smoky aroma of the fire. Stews rich with locally grown grains and seasoned with spices that had already traveled hundreds of miles. The intense sweetness of sun-dried apricots and dates. The simple act of sitting down to a hot, fresh meal in the cool evening air, surrounded by the quiet chatter of other travelers and the scent of jasmine, was a profound moment of human restoration and peace. As the Sogdian merchants ventured further west, the silk, now often traded in smaller, more precious quantities, began to encounter new luxury goods heading east. One of the most sought-after items flowing back towards the Han Empire was glass. Not the roux, simple glassware known in Han China, but exquisite, colored, and often transparent glassware from the Mediterranean region, particularly from the Roman East. The beauty of the glass, its liquid clarity, and its technological complexity were astonishing to the Han. It was the reverse mirror of silk. The West produced the marvel of transparent strength, and the East the marvel of shimmering softness. This reciprocal desire drove the economic engine of the road. The exchange was not simply a transaction of goods, but a mutual appreciation for the aesthetic and technical pinnacle of a distant civilization. The journey culminates for this leg in Kashgar, the city at the western apex of the Tarim Basin, where the northern and southern routes reunited. This was the true nexus point, the geographical pivot where the desert paths ended and the colossal, snow-capped mountains of the Pamirs began their formidable rise. At Kashgar, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and consequence. Merchants arrived with the heavy burdens of the desert behind them, only to face the daunting prospect of the mountain pass ahead. The air here was cooler, crisper, carrying the scent of high-altitude pine and the sharp, mineral smell of stone. The sounds included the distinct, deep echo of voices rebounding off the colossal mountainsides and the heavy, continuous flow of the meltwater streams. It was here that the Sogdians would often transfer their precious silk to another set of intermediaries, preparing it for the next most treacherous leg of the journey, the Pamir Mountains, known chillingly as the roof of the world. This transition point highlights the crucial structure of the Silk Road. The routes were fragmented because the geography demanded it. No single animal, and often no single person, could master all segments. The Bactrian camel, king of the desert, was unsuitable for the icy, narrow mountain trails, where smaller, sturdier yaks and sure-footed horses were required. The skills of a desert guide were useless on the narrow, sheer rock faces of the high passes. This fragmentation fostered a profound, quiet interdependence between the various peoples of Central Asia. The Han needed the Sogdians for their commercial reach. The Sogdians needed the nomadic tribes for protection and mountain peoples for their passage. The entire system relied on a network of deep, if sometimes strained, trust, upheld by the common pursuit of commerce. The culture that developed along the Silk Road was one of adaptability, quiet reverence for the environment, and a profound appreciation for momentary comfort. Travelers lived constantly with the knowledge of danger, of bandits, of extreme weather, political instability. But they were bound together by the collective goal of reaching the next oasis, the next trading post, the next moment of rest. Their stories shared around countless small fires under the immense, star-filled Central Asian sky wove together the cultural understanding of the East and the West, long before any official embassy could. The fabrics worn by the Sogdians, in particular, symbolized this syncretic culture. Their clothing, often patterned, embroidered wool and heavy felt, was durable, designed for the harsh fluctuations of the desert climate. The colors, rich reds, deep blues, and geometric patterns stood in stark contrast to the more subdued aesthetics of the Han, representing a cultural confidence born of constant movement and international exposure. The texture of their clothing was thick and reassuring, a heavy layer of protection against the elements. As the sun sets over the great confluence of Kashgar, casting the massive, jagged shadows of the Pamirs across the town, the air grows still and cold. The sound of the marketplace subsides into the steady background murmur of a city preparing for night. The last of the caravans have secured their lodgings, and the only movements now are the gentle flicker of oil lamps and the quiet tending of animals. The great engine of the Silk Road, driven by the Sogdian intermediaries, rests for the night, its immense, long-form journey paused until the unforgiving sun dictates the resumption of movement in the morning. We leave the caravan here, at the foot of the Pamirs, allowing the deep silence of the mountains to envelop the scene, carrying the scent of pine and stone. The journey ahead is arduous, but the persistent dream of profitable exchange ensures its continuation. Rest now, and let the gentle rhythm of the desert caravans lull you into a state of deep, peaceful slumber. The Silk Road narrative now demands that we scale the vast, formidable barriers separating Central Asia from the Iranian plateau and the vibrant world of the Mediterranean. The colossal Pamir Mountains. This is the journey's most physically demanding segment, a place where the air itself is thin and cold, and the margin for error is non-existent. Part 4 takes us across the roof of the world and into the rich, syncretic culture of the Iranian world, where the Sogdian threads finally begin to merge with the powerful, enduring fabric of Parthian and later Sasanian empires, across the roof of the world, Kashgar to Merv. The departure from Kashgar is marked by a profound change in the sensory environment. The dry, dusty warmth of the desert oases is abruptly replaced by a biting cold, even under the fierce Central Asian sun. The air is sharp, clean, and carries the faint metallic scent of ice and stone. The soundscape shifts from the communal bustle of the marketplace to the vast, echoing silence of the mountains, broken only by them mournful wind whistling through the high passes and the rhythmic, cautious crunch of iron-shod hooves on frozen ground. The travellers undertaking this leg are usually not the same Sogdian merchants who cross the Taklamakan, but specialized mountain guides. Tough, resilient men from local tribes who possess an intimate, life-saving knowledge of the shifting trails and hidden dangers. Their animals are smaller, sturdier, often yaks or mountain ponies, whose sure footing on the treacherous, icy paths is essential for survival. The paths themselves, winding through gorges and over high, difficult passes like the Tashkurgan Pass, are barely discernible, marked only by faint indentations worn into the rock by centuries of seasonal transit. Every step is slow, deliberate, and fraught with risk. Imagine the sound of a small stone tumbling down a steep incline, the sound rapidly growing into a loud, echoing roar that serves as a chilling reminder of the unstable landscape. For weeks, the journey is defined by the relentless, cold effort of ascension. The sun, though powerful, provides little warmth at these altitudes, only a blinding clear light that requires constant squinting. The wind, when it comes, is ferocious, a physical force that pushes against the travelers, whipping their thick, heavy woolen and felt clothes against their bodies. The fabric of the clothing here is entirely functional. Thick, rough, densely woven material that smells of lanolin and smoke, a far cry from the delicate, shimmering silk they carry. It is a world of pure, elemental struggle. The silence of the high mountains is not empty, but profound and overwhelming, punctuated only by the occasional distant crack of a shifting glacier or the high-pitched, lonely call of a raptor circling far above. This forced silence instills a deep sense of introspection in the traveler, a quiet acknowledgement of the humbling power of nature. Finally, after weeks of climbing, the caravans begin their long, gradual descent toward the great river valleys and the fertile plains of Transoxiana, modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The sensory transition is a slow, luxurious relief. The air grows warmer, thicker, and softer on the skin. The high mineral scent of rock gives way to the earthy, floral perfume of river valleys and cultivated land. The sound of running water, rushing down from the mountains, grows into a continuous, comforting roar, the sound of life and abundance returning. Here, in the vast plains between the Amudarya and Sirdarya rivers, lay the home of the Sogdians, cities like Samarkand and Bukhara. These cities were not just trading posts. They were sophisticated cultural capitals, centers of immense learning, artistry, and above all, commerce. Arriving in Samarkand was like plunging into a river of humanity. The soundscape of Samarkand was an auditory tapestry of the world, the ringing of the metal-smith's hammer, the incessant chatter of the bazaar in a dozen different languages, the lowing of livestock, the high-pitched calls of fruit vendors, and the low, dignified chanting of scholars from the nearby academies. The air was a thick, intoxicating perfume of everything traded. Strong, sweet spices like cinnamon and cloves, the smoky aroma of leather, the scent of fresh-baked bread, and the heavy fragrance of local wine. In the Rabad marketplace of Samarkand, the Sogdian traders, now on their home turf, handled the goods. The silk, which had travelled so carefully from the east, was often repackaged, divided, and prepared for its next stages. It was exchanged for local products that would flow back towards China. Dazzling blue lapis lazuli from the distant mountains, high-quality wool, silver from Iranian mines, and exotic fruits. The wealth of the Sogdians was subtle but evident in their clothing, which was often colourful, made of locally produced, patterned silks and wool, heavily embroidered with designs that blended Iranian, Indian, and Chinese motifs. Their homes were filled with beautiful, functional goods, smooth, polished woodwork, thick, richly patterned rugs that softened the sound of footsteps, and walls decorated with vibrant frescoes depicting their global journeys and their deities. The true western gateway from Transoxiana was Merv, in modern-day Turkmenistan, the Pearl of the East. Merv was a magnificent city, a key defensive stronghold and an agricultural marvel, thanks to its sophisticated irrigation system from the Murghab River. This city stood on the borders of the great Iranian empires, first Parthia and later the mighty Sasanian Empire. The atmosphere here was heavier, imbued with the sense of major political power and deep, ancient history. In Merv, the Sogdian network intersected with the organized, powerful trading system of the Iranian empires. The Parthians and Sasanians were masters of internal security and administration, controlling the flow of goods across the vast central portion of the Silk Road. For the Han silk to continue its journey to the Mediterranean, it now had to navigate the political and economic realities of these powerful Western empires. The Parthian and Sasanian rulers were acutely aware of the economic and diplomatic value of the silk trade. They did not just facilitate it, they actively managed and controlled it, primarily for tax revenue and to maintain their position as the essential intermediary between China and Rome. They ensured the routes were relatively safe from banditry and maintained staging posts, but they also dictated prices and restricted direct contact between the extremes of the route. The Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon, on the Tigris River, became one of the greatest consumer centers for silk in the world. Second only to the Roman Empire, the Sasanian nobility, renowned for their extravagant displays of wealth and their sophisticated court culture, draped themselves in the finest silk. They valued the material so highly that they eventually began to master their own weaving techniques, creating distinctive patterned silks that would eventually become famous in their own right, merging Chinese material with Iranian aesthetics. The journey from Merv westward, across the Iranian plateau toward the city of Hekatompelos, and eventually to the Mediterranean ports, was less about battling geography and more about moving through organized political territory. The landscape was still immense and challenging, vast, often dry plains punctuated by rugged mountain ranges, but the security infrastructure was stronger. The sites along this route included magnificent Zoroastrian fire temples, their stone structures severe and solid, contrasting with the soft, flowing robes of the priests tending the eternal flame, the smell of burning sandalwood and myrrh. Offerings to the supreme deity Ahura Mazda would occasionally drift across the trade routes, a profoundly spiritual scent that spoke of a deep, ancient, and enduring faith. The sound of the Sasanian world was different from the Han or the Sogdian. It was often the deep, booming rhythm of military drumming as royal armies marched to secure the borders. The complicated, melodic sounds of Pahlavi, the official court language, and the intense, metallic clamor of the Persian metalworkers, renowned across the ancient world for their exquisite silver and gold work. The goods exchanged here were increasingly luxurious. Chinese silk was traded for Sasanian silver vessels, magnificent rugs, and high-quality pearls from the Persian Gulf. This entire central segment of the Silk Road was characterized by a massive, ongoing exchange of artistic influences, not just material goods. Chinese motifs, dragons, phoenixes, stylized clouds, began to appear subtly in Sasanian art, just as Iranian patterns and colors influenced the later silks woven in the East. The slow, steady flow of the caravans, now organized and protected by the formidable Sasanian state, continued its relentless westward movement. Imagine a caravan moving at sunset across the baked red earth of the Iranian plateau. The light is a deep, resonant gold, turning the dust kicked up by the animals into a shimmering cloud. The sound is the same ancient rhythm, the shuffle of hooves, the creak of leather, the low voices of the handlers, but now, a new sense of administrative structure underpins the movement, a powerful empire guaranteeing the passage. This section of the journey, under the watchful, taxing eyes of the Iranian powers, was crucial to the Silk Road's endurance. It was a testament to the fact that the desire for the exotic, for the ethereal softness of silk and the brilliant clarity of glass was so powerful that it compelled two of the world's greatest ancient powers, China and Sasanian, Persia, to cooperate on a long-term, logistical scale, albeit with mutual suspicion. The profit was the peace. The trade was the temporary truce. As the sun fully sets on the Iranian plateau and the last caravan makes camp, the flickering light of the campfire illuminates the faces of Iranian guards, Central Asian merchants, and perhaps even a rare Roman buyer who has ventured deep into the Sasanian interior. They eat, they trade hushed rumors of distant kings, and they settle down to sleep, their rest secured by the presence of a strong, watchful empire. The sound that finally settles over the camp is the low, comforting crackle of the fire, the distant, repetitive call of a jackal, in the deep, shared sigh of a world that, despite its vast distances and profound differences, finds its common language in the exchange of precious goods. We pause here, on the edge of the Sasanian world, allowing the powerful, deep sense of ancient Persian history to envelop our narrative, preparing to trace the final, triumphant leg of the silk's journey to the west. The Silk Road, a network of tenuous paths originating in the east, now reaches its ultimate destination, the opulent, insatiable markets of the Roman Empire. Part 5 of our narrative focuses on this final, grand movement, culminating in the apex of the silk's value and the profound, transformative cultural clash at the Mediterranean ports. This is the period of the Silk Road's highest splendor and greatest economic consequence, described with steady, awestruck grandeur. The triumph of silk, Sasanian borders to Antioch, leaving the vast, organized territory of the Sasanian Empire. The caravans carrying the precious silk enter the final, tumultuous segment of their journey. travelling towards the western termini, the great Roman cities of the Levant, such as Palmyra and Antioch. This border region was a place of perpetual tension, an immense geopolitical fault line between two of the world's most powerful empires. Yet, despite the frequent wars and political hostilities between the Sasanians and the Romans, the silk trade persisted. The demand for Eastern luxuries in Rome was so overwhelming, the potential profit so immense, that merchants on both sides found ways to conduct business, often meeting in neutral or semi-independent cities. Commerce, it seems, was the only diplomacy powerful enough to transcend imperial rivalries. The Sogdian intermediaries, ever adaptable, would frequently operate in these frontier cities, where they would transfer the silk, now astronomically valuable after its long transit, to Roman or local Arab merchants. The scent of the air here was a complex, powerful mix of the desert's dry heat, the salt tang from the distant sea, and the rich, complex aroma of olive oil and Roman incense. The most vital of these nodes was the great city of Palmyra, the bride of the desert. Situated in the Syrian wilderness, Palmyra transformed its unique position into phenomenal wealth, acting as the indispensable broker between the Roman Mediterranean and the Sasanian East. Its magnificent architecture, a fusion of classical Roman and indigenous Eastern styles, was a physical manifestation of the cultural and commercial convergence that defined the final stretch of the Silk Road. In Palmyra, the soundscape was rich and cosmopolitan. The rhythmic clatter of stone on stone from the masons still working on the city's endless monumental projects, the distinct, clear Latin of the Roman administrators, the melodious, persuasive Greek of the common traders, and the rougher guttural accents of the local Aramaic speakers. The air vibrated with the energy of immense, untaxed wealth being exchanged. The silk, now in Roman hands, was rapidly moved toward the ultimate consumer market, the Roman cities of the Mediterranean coast. Antioch, the third largest city in the Roman Empire, was the most spectacular final destination of the overland route. A city of over 500,000 people, with bustling harbours, magnificent public baths, and an elite population obsessed with luxury, Antioch was the West's ultimate gateway to the East. When the silk arrived in Antioch, its journey was nearly over, but its real story, its transformation into a symbol of unparalleled wealth and status, was just beginning. The final price of the silk in Rome was staggering, often exceeding its weight in gold. This immense expense was a direct result of the long, dangerous journey, the multiple fees and taxes levied by the Sasanian and border states, and the sheer cost of the labor required for its transit. The demand for the material was not merely commercial. It was deeply psychological and cultural. The Romans were captivated by silk for its ethereal quality, its lightness, its transparency, and the way it draped the body, suggesting but not fully revealing the form beneath. It was the ultimate status symbol, worn by senators, wealthy matrons, and emperors to broadcast their power and reach. The sheer physical sensation of the silk was part of its allure. Unlike the rough, heavy wool or linen that comprised most Roman clothing, silk was cool against the skin in the summer heat, and paradoxically warm in the winter, yet always impossibly soft. The rustle of a silk garment became the quiet sound of aristocratic power in the marble halls of Rome, a subtle auditory signifier of wealth that required no shouting. The scent of the silk itself, often faintly perfumed by the spices and incense it traveled alongside, was part of the exotic aura. The Roman obsession with silk, however, created a significant economic drain on the empire. Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist, famously complained that the empire's silver was constantly flowing out to China and India to purchase these luxuries. This massive, one-way flow of precious metals became a source of political concern, a continuous murmur of disapproval among Roman fiscal conservatives who saw the trade as a weakness. In an attempt to mitigate the cost and to make the limited supply go further, the Romans developed a highly skilled industry of silk processing. The raw, heavy Chinese silk, often arriving in thick bundles, was unwoven, the individual threads separated and then rewoven into thinner, more translucent fabrics. This process was known as gauze weaving or bombicina the fine, almost transparent cloth that caused a morale uproar among some conservative Romans for being too revealing. The cultural exchange was not entirely one-sided. While the East received Roman gold, it also slowly began to absorb Roman aesthetics and technologies. The glass that Chang'an had heard of and eventually saw now arrived regularly in the East, its delicate beauty profoundly influencing local craftsmanship. Roman gold coins, particularly the durable, reliable aureus and denarius, flowed east in such numbers that they became accepted currency in many Central Asian trading centers, their distinct metallic scent and weight a sign of stability. The flow of ideas was arguably more profound than the flow of goods. Along the Silk Road, in the baggage of the Sogdian traders and the Han monks, traveled the world's major religions. Buddhism, originating in India, had long been traveling eastward along the trade routes into China, its message of quiet contemplation finding receptive ears in the oasis kingdoms. Christianity, particularly in its Nestorian form, and later Manichaeism, an intricate philosophical religion, traveled westward and eastward from their Middle Eastern origins, using the Sogdian trading network as their essential missionary highway. The small, quiet chapels of the Nestorian Christians and the meeting houses of the Manichaeans sprang up in the major trading cities across Central Asia, right alongside the Han garrisons and the Buddhist stupas. The sound of these faiths, the meditativum of the Buddhist chant, the rhythmic prayers of the Christian liturgy, the quiet philosophical debates of the Manichaeans intermingled with the commerce, creating a spiritual atmosphere as rich and diverse as the goods being traded. The air itself seemed to carry the scent of diverse incenses, smoky sandalwood from India, sharp frankincense from Arabia, and the sweet perfume of local floral offerings. The height of the Silk Road's grandeur occurred when both the Han and Roman empires were at their zenith, creating an unprecedented chain of stable, powerful polities that spanned the entire Eurasian landmass. This stability, however relative, allowed merchants to take immense risks, knowing the rule of law or the rule of profit would generally prevail. The sheer volume of traffic, the constant arrival and departure of caravans from the ports of Antioch, marked the climax of the Silk Road's historical importance. This climax, however, carried the seeds of its own vulnerability. The intense interaction and movement of people also facilitated the slow, inevitable movement of things, unwanted. Primarily, disease. Unseen and utterly devastating, plagues traveled the same pathways as the silk. The Antonine plague, likely smallpox, which ravaged the Roman Empire in the 2nd century CE, and other pestilences that affected both the Han and Roman worlds, were tragic byproducts of this profound interconnectedness. The silk thread was also a vector for death, a grim reminder of the price of global interaction. The sheer grandeur of the silk's arrival in Antioch, the parades, the wealth, the feverish demand, this was the crescendo. The Roman world was utterly dependent on the Eastern supply, having no idea of the secret of its creation. The Roman chronicler Procopius noted this profound ignorance, stating that the Romans believed the silk came from a special tree, a testament to the East's successful guarding of the sericulture secret. In the end, the silk arrived not merely as a commodity, but as a cultural declaration, a testament to the patient, advanced craftsmanship of the East and the insatiable appetite for beauty and status in the West. It was the material embodiment of two worlds desperately reaching across a continent, paying any price, economic, physical, and epidemiological, to touch one another. As we let the image of this grand commerce settle, the sounds of the Antioch harbors slowly begin to recede, the creak of the ships, the shouted orders in Greek and Latin, the clamor of the exchange. The sea air, with its salty tang and scent of commerce, turns cool as the vast, warm Mediterranean night descends. The greatest civilizations of the ancient world have touched, exchanging their most precious possessions. The grandeur of the Silk Road's peak, achieved through the tenuous connection between the Han and Roman empires, was destined to shift and evolve. No great human endeavor remains static. Part 6 of our narrative traces the slow, profound aftermath of this golden age, exploring how the legacy of the Silk Road endured, transformed, and ultimately left its indelible mark on the world. concluding with a soothing reflection suitable for deep sleep. The slow twilight and enduring legacy, the post-classical flow. The first sign of the Silk Road's transformation was the slow, simultaneous decline of its two anchoring civilizations. In the east, the mighty Han dynasty fractured and fell in 220 CE, ushering in centuries of division and conflict. In the west, the Roman Empire weakened and split, with the western half eventually collapsing, leaving the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman, as the inheritor of the trade. This political fragmentation did not halt the flow of silk, but it fundamentally changed its rhythm and character. Where once the merchant had to negotiate with two great, centralized powers, they now had to navigate a complex, ever-shifting mosaic of smaller kingdoms, nomadic states, and local authorities, each demanding taxes and tolls. The journey became riskier, the costs higher, and the profits less certain. The sounds of imperial stability, the rhythmic marching of armies, the formal decrees, were replaced by the more volatile sounds of localized conflict and the constant murmur of political intrigue. However, the demand for silk was now permanent. It had ceased to be merely a luxury and had become a necessity of aristocratic life, a cultural expectation in courts from Constantinople to Persia. This enduring demand ensured that the pathways remained open, sustained now not by imperial decree, but by pure economic inertia and the tireless effort of the Sogdian merchants, who adapted and thrived in the fluid political landscape. A profound shift occurred in the 6th century CE, an event that symbolically weakened the power of the land route. Emperor Justinian of the Byzantine Empire, weary of paying exorbitant prices to the Sasanian middlemen, initiated a covert, momentous act of industrial espionage. According to the legend recorded by Procopius, 2 Nestorian monks, having lived in China, successfully smuggled silkworm eggs out of the east, hiding them inside hollow bamboo canes. This silent theft, the quiet movement of tiny, fragile eggs, was the beginning of sericulture in the West. When the Byzantine Empire successfully established its own silk industry, the monopoly of the East was broken. The precious cargo of the overland route diminished. Silk was no longer the exclusive product of China. The air in Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, slowly began to carry the sweet, unique scent of mulberry leaves and silkworms. The sound of the silk loom, once only heard in the East, began its quiet, rhythmic clack-clack in the workshops of the West. However, the Silk Road did not die. It merely transformed. While the pure Chinese silk monopoly faded, the route found new purpose and new products. The Arabs, galvanized by the rise of Islam in the 7th century, became the new dominant force across the central segment of the route. They swiftly established a vast, unified caliphate that stretched from Spain to Central Asia, creating a new epoch of stability. The Islamic Golden Age saw the flow of new, immensely important goods. From Chinacam paper, an invention that revolutionized Islamic scholarship and later European learning. From the Islamic world flowed sophisticated astronomical instruments, advanced medical knowledge, and the Indian numeral system, including the concept of zero, which fundamentally transformed Western mathematics. The Sogdians, ever present, simply shifted their trade to suit the new, dynamic Islamic markets, becoming essential cultural transmitters once again. The soundscape of this era was one of intense, organized learning, the passionate, rhythmic recitation of the Quran, the busy scratching of reeds on paper in libraries, the low, intense murmur of philosophical debate in the Beit al-Hikmah, House of Wisdom. The air smelled of ink, parchment, and the deep, rich fragrance of spices that were now moving along the route in greater volume than ever before. The final dramatic phase of the overland route's decline was ushered in by the terrifying, swift expansion of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century. Initially, the Mongol conquests brought chaos, the sounds of brutal warfare and the smell of destruction. However, once the vast empire was established, spanning nearly the entire Silk Road from China to Persia, it paradoxically created the most secure and centralized trading route in its entire history, the Pax Mongolica. For a brief, dazzling period, merchants like the famous Venetian Marco Polo could travel the entire length of the Silk Road with relative ease and security. carrying letters of safe passage granted by the Great Khan. This was a second golden age, one of unprecedented cultural and logistical unity. Polos returned to the West, bringing tales of Chinese coal, postal systems, and vast, organized cities like Hangzhou, opened the European mind to the immense sophistication of the East like never before. Yet, even this security was temporary. The Mongol Empire eventually fragmented, and more importantly, the Black Death, the final, catastrophic global pandemic that utilized the Silk Road network, swept westward in the mid-14th century, devastating populations from China to Europe. The sound of the trade routes went silent, replaced by the grim sound of tolling bells and the silence of abandoned cities. The path of trade was stained by the passage of pestilence, the bitter price paid for global connection. By the mid-15th century, the relentless rise of the Ottoman Empire closed off many of the traditional land routes, effectively making the overland journey too perilous and costly. This geopolitical reality, combined with the devastating memory of the Black Death, finally forced Europe to look elsewhere. The demand for Eastern goods, spices, silks, porcelain, was higher than ever, but the pathways had shifted. The Silk Road is a primary overland route, faded not with a sudden collapse, but with a slow geographic bypass. The dream of direct access to the wealth of the East spurred the age of exploration. Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and other explorers were seeking a maritime Silk Road, a way to circumvent the land powers and tap directly into the source of the coveted luxuries. The final, triumphant legacy of the Silk Road was not the silk itself, but the drive it instilled in the West to connect the world. In final reflection, the enduring legacy of the Silk Road is not etched in stone, but woven into the very fabric of our shared world. It was never just a road. It was a vast, ancient conversation. It taught the Chinese about horses and mathematics. It gave the Persians new artistic motifs. It brought the Romans silk and spices. And it carried the seeds of Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity across continents. Every time we write on paper, every time we calculate using a place value system, every time we appreciate a patterned textile, we are touching the ghost of the Silk Road, the Sogdians, the Han envoys, the Roman traders, the devout monks. Their quiet, persistent efforts across dusty deserts and icy mountains created the first truly globalized world. We end our journey, where all journeys eventually end, in a state of quiet contemplation. The wind, which once carried the scent of spices and the dust of 1,000 miles, is now a gentle breeze. The sounds of the ancient caravans have faded into the deep silence of the night. Let the immense, slow rhythm of this history, the patient years of travel, the quiet exchange of goods and ideas, the enduring power of human connection, serve as a gentle anchor for your rest. Imagine the vast, silent stretch of the desert under the Central Asian stars, the samastars that guided Zhang Qian on his epic foundational journey. Feel the deep, encompassing peace of a world interconnected by invisible threads. You are safe, you are grounded, and the weight of history is a soft, comforting blanket. Drift now, and let the long, peaceful journey of the Silk Road carry you into a deep and restorative sleep. Certainly, I have compiled all the 115 visual cues from the 6 parts of the Silk Road. A deep journey from Chang'an to Antioch, script into a numbered table. All quiz adhere to the mandatory style. Epic historical painting and vintage map style. Grand, painterly, atmospheric, textured, with soft natural lighting, golden hour, hazy daylight, muted earth tones, ochres, browns, dusty greens, deep reds,